Well, you can't accuse the French of not tackling the big issues. French men will face fines for wolf whistling or lecherous behaviour, whatever that means. Men who wolf whistle or are aggressively lecherous to women on French streets face fines under a new law against sexism and sexual abuse to be passed next year. Gender Equality Minister, a completely useless ministerial appointment, Marlene Schiappa, 34, a feminist, what a surprise, and writer, said workshops would be held across France to discuss the bill as scores of French women took to Twitter to share experiences of harassment in the workplace. Well, of course they did. Never underestimate the female propensity to pile on a victim narrative. French President Emmanuel Macron on Sunday said he wants to tackle sexist male attitudes in public spaces and will send new contingents of community police to enforce the new law. Yes, I'm sure the French public will be happy to see their money being spent to tackle this scourge of toxic masculinity. Now, I'm not going to defend wolf whistling. I think any male that does it is essentially admitting he doesn't have anything interesting or intelligent to say. But there's an obvious difference between criticising the act and criminalising it. And of course, one of the obvious problems is that it's totally subjective. One woman's lecherous behaviour is another woman's flirtatious behaviour, as police and lawyers noted. Police unions and some lawyers criticise the law as well nigh impossible to enforce, as culprits would have to be caught in the act and the line between harassment and flirtation hard to draw. But as Ms. Schiappa said, we know very well at what point we start feeling intimidated, unsafe or harassed in the street. Yes, it's all about the feels. She cited examples such as when a man invades a woman's personal space by talking to you 10, 20 centimetres from your face, or follows a woman for several blocks, or asks for your number 17 times. Yeah, well, that does sound like harassment to me. And if you're a male with a mate that has a habit of following women for several blocks, hassling them for phone numbers, then you might want to pull him up on his creepy behaviour. But what about the guy that asks you out twice? Is that too many? Where do you draw the line? As we know, it depends on the guy, doesn't it? If it's the guy you like, then I'm sure twice or 3 times will be just fine. And of course, this law would never be abused. I mean, it's not like women to make false accusations, is it? Now, this was part of a draft law that also seeks to alter rules on consensual sex. You may have heard the story of a 28-year-old man who had sexual intercourse with an 11-year-old girl and was charged with sexual abuse of a minor instead of rape, because under French law, unless the perpetrator threatens or restrains the victim, it's not considered rape. So perhaps this is an attempt to smuggle in some new laws around street harassment whilst addressing a more serious issue that does need addressing. And of course, this wouldn't be about letting a good scandal go to waste, would it? Asked about the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the avalanche of Twitter messages posted by French women who recalled their experience of being harassed at work, Ms. Schiappa said she was impressed by the huge number of testimonies. So you were impressed by a hashtag campaign for which no evidence has to be proffered that conforms to your confirmation bias. It's not women who don't speak, but society which does not listen to them, she said. Well, perhaps, Ms. Schiappa, that's because not every petty grievance or whinge women have is worth listening to. Now, across the channel, there are calls for having wolf whistling declared a sexual offence after this woman, Poppy Smart, went to the police after builders at a site in Worcester had wolf whistled at her over a month. Poppy claims these unknown men had invaded her personal space, and things came to a head when a builder blocked her way and said, "Morning, love." Well, again, if that's true, it's a dick move and your workmates should call you out on it. But does it rise to the level of being a sexual offence? Of course, you can imagine all kinds of problems with making something like wolf whistling a sexual offence. And thankfully, Martin Dobney has done the heavy lifting on this one. He consulted a female criminal barrister who naturally didn't want to be identified for fear of being ostracised by the sisterhood. Legally, wolf whistling would never be reclassified as a crime under the Sexual Offences Act 2003, which is reserved for serious sexual offences only, and upon conviction of such offences, defendants may be subject to being placed on the sex offenders register. Evidentially, I fail to see how wolf whistling at a person can realistically be made an offence. There would be massive identification issues involved. What happens if there are 10 or so men several stories up on a high building and one of them wolf whistles at a woman and she makes a complaint to the police? How on earth would she identify the culprit? Would there be a wolf whistling ID parade, or are you going to charge them all with the crime by way of joint enterprise if they happen to laugh at it? Yeah, perhaps you need a RICO law for wolf whistling. If you can charge one with a crime, you can charge them all. What if there's a mistaken wolf whistling? A woman thinks a man is whistling at her, but he's actually doing it to another woman around the corner or on the other side of the street, and she isn't bothered about it. Because of the physical distance between the complainant and alleged culprit usually involved in wolf whistling, it would be an evidential minefield. Are we to deploy special harassment police to prowl building sites with cameras? Most wolf whistlers are in cars and drive off quickly or at a great distance away on building sites wearing hard hats and identical clothing that would make them hard to ID. Are we going to send police on wild goose chases to find these whistlers and bring them to justice? It would give the CPS one great big headache. The standard of proof in criminal cases is so high. I doubt in most cases the Crown would be in a position to meet it. Now, all that sounds like basic common sense, doesn't it? But would you put it past activists to lobby for lowering the standard of proof? Would you put it past the British police to deploy a special harassment unit and send them off on wild goose chases? Isn't that essentially what they're doing online with almost 3,500 arrests for offensive online comments? Amber Rudd recently announced a special national police hub focused on online hate, another completely subjective term. One person's humour is another person's hate. You may remember last year Nottinghamshire Police labelled misogyny a hate crime, and included in their definition was unwanted or uninvited physical or verbal contact or engagement. So approaching a woman and asking for directions, if uninvited, although unlikely, could get you technically arrested for hate crime. Now, of course, Daubney's article is talking about classifying wolf whistling as a sexual offence, which is a different category altogether, of course. But I bring up the other examples to demonstrate that perhaps it's not so far-fetched after all. Just ask yourself, in which way are current laws moving? In the direction of more freedom to say what you like, or less? Daubney's lawyer friend goes on to note the exorbitant cost to the court system to prosecute these would-be crimes, and she asks the eminently sensible question: do we really want these cases clogging up the courts? But again, I would suggest that there are plenty of feminists and gender ideologues that would think it's worth it because they're so obviously self-obsessed and determined to punish men for any infraction they find offensive. Daubney then finishes the article with this common sense solution. So in the absence of any solid case for making wolf whistling illegal, the practice is what it is, a naff hangover from a bygone era. Men should pack it in and call out others who do it. We have a responsibility to end this idiotic behaviour, as it makes men easy to lambast and is a wasteful distraction. But women who are whistled at shouldn't go running to the police either, because while cases like Poppy's might make the papers, there'll be absolutely no chance of getting a criminal prosecution, and that's the way it should remain. Well, of course, Martin is absolutely right. It should remain that way. But given the legal trend to prioritise subjective feelings of offence takers, where does it end? Are we headed toward a society in which every interaction between males and females must be pre-approved by women? As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.